You know how sometimes life changes in the smallest moments? Not with thunder or fireworks, but with something as simple as a voice in the distance? This is a story about one of those moments. A story about a man who had everything except the ability to listen, and a woman who had nothing except a gift the world had never bothered to notice. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 30,000 feet above the ground. The commercial flight had left Chicago almost an hour ago. Outside the small windows, clouds stretched endlessly like cotton fields in the sky. Inside the business class cabin, James Hartfield sat in seat 2A, surrounded by silence and expensive leather. His tray table was covered with documents, contracts, research papers, medical translations. His pen moved quickly across the pages, marking, correcting, never stopping. This was James's world, controlled, quiet, predictable. He preferred it that way. But then something cut through that carefully constructed silence. A voice, soft and distant, drifting from somewhere beyond the curtain that separated business class from economy. A woman was singing, not performing, not entertaining, just singing. The melody was unfamiliar to James. The language wasn't English, maybe Spanish, maybe something else entirely. He couldn't understand the words, but something about the way they were sung made his pen stop moving. The cadence, the spacing between each syllable, the tender urgency woven into every note. It all carried a weight he couldn't name. James looked up from his papers for the first time since takeoff. He glanced toward the fabric divider separating the cabins, as if he might see through it. Someone back there, in the cramped seats of economy, was singing a lullaby. Not for applause or attention, for comfort, for love. The sound felt both completely foreign and strangely familiar, like a memory from a life he'd never lived. He tried to return to his work. His eyes scanned the same sentence 3 times, but the words wouldn't stick. That voice kept pulling him back, gentle and insistent, like a hand on his shoulder. 2 rows beyond the curtain, in seat 18F, Elena Martinez held her 4-year-old son against her chest. Julian's small body was finally cool to the touch. For 3 hours she'd watched his fever climb, helpless and terrified in a metal tube 7 miles above the earth. But an hour ago, it had broken. The worst had passed. Now she hummed the second verse of a lullaby her grandmother used to sing. It was an old melody, passed down through generations but rarely shared outside the family. Her voice was tired but steady, wrapping around her son like an invisible blanket. In the row ahead, an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair turned around. Tears glistened in her eyes. "I haven't heard that song since I was a child in Florence," the woman said, her Italian accent thick with emotion. "My nonna used to sing it to me before bed." Elena offered a small, respectful nod. No explanation, no story, just acknowledgement. She adjusted Julian's position in her arms and continued humming, softer now, as if the song was a secret between her and her sleeping child. A few minutes later, a flight attendant arrived with the meal cart. She stopped beside Elena's row, trying to read from her list. "Would you like the Farelli?" the attendant asked, stumbling over the pronunciation. Her tone was rushed, slightly embarrassed. Without looking up from Julian, Elena corrected her gently. "It's farfalla. Not harsh, not condescending, just accurate. The same way you might straighten a crooked picture frame while walking past it. A small correction made out of habit, not judgment." From his business class seat, James heard that correction. He glanced back again. This time, his gaze lingered. Who was this woman? Someone who sang lullabies in languages he couldn't identify and corrected Italian pronunciation without a second thought. Before he could stop himself, James pressed the call button above his seat. The flight attendant appeared, slightly confused. "Yes, Mr. Hartfield? Is everything all right? Is there a reason I can't move to row 18? James asked. The attendant blinked. "You want to sit in economy class, sir?" "Yes, I'd like to change seats." For a moment, she just stared at him. Business class passengers didn't request moves to economy. It simply didn't happen. But after a quick verification of his identity and a confused nod, she said, "Of course, Mr. Hartfield." James closed his laptop. He gathered his coat, his papers, his leather briefcase. Then he stood and walked through the divider into economy class. The seats were smaller here, the air a bit warmer, the sounds of crying babies and conversation mixing together. He found row 18. Elena sat by the window, her son asleep in her arms. The middle seat was empty. James didn't ask permission. He didn't introduce himself. He simply sat down beside her and said nothing at all. For the next hour, silence stretched between them. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It wasn't the silence of strangers forced together. It was something else, something patient. Elena adjusted Julian's blanket. She whispered something in French. So quiet, James almost missed it. He turned his head slightly, like someone catching the end of a sentence that suddenly mattered. And for the first time in months, James found himself truly listening. Not planning, not analyzing, just present. Somewhere over Indiana, the cabin lights dimmed. Elena hadn't noticed James watching her directly, but she felt it. That particular attention people in expensive suits sometimes gave when they encountered someone who didn't fit their expectations. A woman soothing a child in Turkish, then correcting Spanish pronunciation moments later. It tended to draw a quiet confusion. James turned toward her, not with small talk about the weather or the flight, but with purpose. He held a thick research packet in his hands. "I'm reviewing a translation for a clinical trial we're launching in Istanbul," he said, his voice even and professional. "English to Turkish. Something feels off about the phrasing. May I get your opinion?" Elena accepted the document without hesitation. She flipped through the pages quickly at first, scanning the headers and subheadings. Then she slowed down. Her eyes moved with practiced precision, absorbing not just words but context, nuance, meaning. Within 15 seconds, she circled a sentence with her pen. "This word here, ilas, it means medication," Elena explained, pointing to the marked line. "But the context clearly indicates comprehensive treatment protocols. The correct term should be tadavi. If you submit this document as written, it reads as though patients are receiving pills rather than full therapeutic care. In a clinical setting, that distinction matters. It could change how people understand the entire trial." James blinked. That specific line hadn't been flagged by any of his professional reviewers. 3 different translation services had approved it. Yet this woman, holding a sleeping child on a commercial flight, had identified a critical error in less than 15 seconds. "You studied Turkish?" he asked, genuinely surprised. Elena shook her head. "I studied language itself. Turkish is one of 7 I've picked up over the years. Life forces you to learn quickly when subtitles aren't available, and you need to understand what's being said around you." "Where did you study?" "Northwestern University, linguistics program." She paused, glancing down at Julian. "I left during my 3rd year." James nodded slowly. "Because of my son, Julian." Her voice was steady, factual. "He arrived earlier than planned, and the world doesn't pause while you catch up. Daycare doesn't wait. Bills don't wait. Life keeps moving whether you're ready or not." She said it without bitterness, without self-pity, just facts delivered in the same measured tone she'd used to correct the flight attendant earlier. This was her reality, and she'd learned to speak it plainly. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Boston. Around them, passengers began adjusting their seats, gathering their belongings, preparing to return to their lives on the ground. Elena handed the research packet back to James without additional commentary. He took it carefully, placed it in his leather folder, and zipped it slowly. Then he looked at her once more. "I have a meeting tomorrow at 10, James said. "Biotech partners from 6 different countries. We'll be switching between 4 languages over 90 minutes. I need someone in the room who understands when words carry meanings beyond their surface definitions. Someone who knows the difference between what's technically correct and what actually communicates truth." Elena met his gaze directly. "That sounds like a job offer." "It's not," James replied evenly. "It's just a seat at the table. Come if you want. Walk away if you don't. No obligations, no contracts, just a come." Elena stared at the seat back in front of her. Julian stirred slightly in her arms but didn't wake. The plane descended through clouds, dropping toward the lights of Boston below. She didn't answer James's invitation, but she didn't refuse it either. The wheels touched down. The plane taxied to the gate, and Elena sat there holding her son, holding the possibility of something she couldn't quite name yet. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we don't make with words. They're the ones we make in silence, in the space between what's offered and what's accepted. Elena didn't know it yet, but that silence, that pause, was about to change everything. The morning air in Boston was sharp and unforgiving. Elena walked along the edge of Copley Square with her hands buried deep in the pockets of her thin coat. The cold bit through the fabric, stinging her fingers, making her wonder if the sensation came from the weather or from the weight of the decision she still hadn't made. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with numb fingers and read the message on the screen. Julian's speech therapy session. Canceled again due to scheduling conflicts. The third time this month. Elena stared at the notification for a long moment. She could feel the frustration building in her chest, but she swallowed it down. Getting angry wouldn't change anything. It never did. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. She still had an hour before she needed to pick Julian up from daycare. 1 hour to decide who she wanted to be today. Elena reached a corner and stopped. To her left was the subway station, the familiar path, the safe path, the one that led back to her small apartment and her small life. To her right stood a tall building with gold lettering that read the Fairmont. James's meeting was on the 17th floor. For a long moment, Elena just stood there. Cars passed. People hurried by with their coffee cups and briefcases. The city moved around her while she remained perfectly still. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she turned right and crossed the street. The lobby of the Fairmont was all marble and polished brass. Elena's worn sneakers squeaked slightly against the floor as she approached the reception desk. The woman behind the counter was typing something, her manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. She didn't look up. Elena cleared her throat softly. The receptionist glanced up, her professional smile already in place. "Can I help you?" "I was asked to attend a meeting arranged by Mr. Hartfield," Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I don't have a confirmation number or anything. I'm sorry." The woman's fingers moved across her keyboard, eyes scanning the monitor. For a terrible moment, Elena thought she'd made a mistake, that yesterday had been some kind of dream, that James hadn't really meant the invitation. But then the receptionist nodded. "No problem at all. There's a note here. You're expected, 17th floor." Elena stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid closed, she caught her reflection in the brushed steel walls. No makeup. Wrinkled coat still damp from the morning cold. A coffee stain on her sleeve from breakfast with Julian. He'd bumped her arm while reaching for his sippy cup. She looked like someone who'd wandered into the wrong building. Someone who didn't belong in conference rooms with biotech executives and international partners. The elevator chimed, 17th floor. Elena took a breath and stepped out. The conference room was nothing like she'd imagined. There were no polished handshakes or cheerful greetings. No one chatting about their flights or their hotels. Just 5 people seated around a long table, flipping through documents in concentrated silence. James sat at the head of the table. When Elena entered, he didn't look up. He simply gestured to the empty chair beside him, a small, subtle movement that somehow said everything. "Sit here. You belong here." Elena sat down. No one introduced her. No one asked who she was or why she was there. It was as if her presence had always been part of the plan. A thick document slid across the polished wood toward her. She looked down at the pages. Parallel columns in German, English, and French. Clinical trial agreements, regulatory approvals, logistics protocols, dense technical language that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But Elena's eyes didn't glaze over. They sharpened. She picked up a pen and began to read. Her mind switched between languages as fluidly as breathing. German, then English, then French, then back again. She wasn't just reading words. She was reading meaning, context, implication. In the margin beside a French passage, she underlined the word essay and wrote étude beside it in careful handwriting. James noticed. He leaned closer and whispered, "Why?" Elena kept her voice low. The word essay implies something experimental, something that might not work. It suggests uncertainty. But étude carries more clinical weight and authority. It's about perception and professional credibility. In documents like this, perception is everything. James gave a single nod. He said nothing more, but Elena saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Then came the real test. A man at the far end of the table spoke up. He had a thick Eastern European accent and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He was looking at James, but his words challenged the entire room. Apologies, Mr. Hartfield, but our interpretation of the current regulations doesn't support multinational supervision in Budapest, he said firmly. The Hungarian government has very specific rules about foreign oversight. I don't see how this partnership can move forward under these conditions. The room fell silent. Elena could feel the tension thickening in the air. This was the moment where deals collapsed, where months of work fell apart over a single regulatory disagreement. Without thinking, Elena leaned forward. In March of this year, she said clearly, Hungary updated Axielev. There's now a specific clause, Section 4, subsection B, that allows foreign audit panels in joint biomedical studies, provided they register with the National Public Health Center within 30 days of the trial's initiation. She pulled out her phone, opened a PDF she'd downloaded 2 days ago while researching European medical regulations, something she did in her spare time. The way other people watch television, and turned the screen toward the man. Page 37, paragraph 3, Elena said. The amendment was passed almost unanimously. It's designed specifically to encourage international collaboration. The man's frown deepened, but he leaned forward, studying the document on Elena's phone. Not with anger or defensiveness, but with genuine interest. How did you, he began, then trailed off. Elena offered a small shrug. I read footnotes carefully. Most people don't, but that's usually where the most important information lives. After a long silence, James turned to the man and said simply, Shall we proceed? The conversation moved forward. The tension dissolved. The deal was back on track. Elena exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath since entering the elevator. James didn't thank her. He didn't offer congratulations or praise. But halfway through the next section of the meeting, he pushed a bottle of water across the table toward her. He didn't look at her when he did it, didn't say a word, just slid the bottle within her reach and continued talking to the others. Somehow that silent gesture felt like the warmest acknowledgement Elena had received in years. When the meeting finally ended, the others gathered their folders and briefcases. They exchanged brief farewells in French, German, and Turkish, phrases Elena understood perfectly but didn't join. She wasn't part of their world, not yet, maybe not ever. She waited until the last person left and the door clicked shut. Only then did she reach for her coat. James stood across the room with his back turned, checking his phone. His face reflected in the floor-to-ceiling window, unreadable and distant. Elena's fingers tightened around her coat. She should leave, thank him politely and walk away before this became something she couldn't control. You came without confirming, James said without turning around. Elena paused. I didn't know if I belonged. Now he turned to face her directly. His expression was serious but not unkind. You corrected international regulatory law in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation, James said, and no one questioned your authority. That's not luck, Elena. That's expertise. She didn't know what to say. Her eyes drifted toward the conference table where her handwritten notes still lay scattered across the documents. James stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes. I need someone who can do what you just did, he said quietly. Someone who catches the mistakes before they cost lives, not just contracts, before misunderstandings become crises. I need someone who knows the difference between what sounds right and what is right. Elena looked at him then, really looked at him. She felt something stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe, or fear, or some complicated mixture of both. Paris, James said. Next Thursday. There's a negotiation with a French regulatory board. Half the conflict is linguistic. The other half is institutional pride. I need you there. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. It had no title, no contact information. Just a hotel name and a time. Elena took it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. This isn't exactly a job offer, is it? She asked. It's not charity either, James replied. Then almost as an afterthought, he added, Bring your son. We'll arrange childcare on site. Professional, vetted, safe, whatever you need. Elena blinked. That detail hadn't been in any script she'd imagined. I didn't mention Julian today, she said softly. You didn't have to, James said. Then he turned and walked toward the door. No goodbye, no handshake, just trust extended in silence, like a bridge built from nothing but faith. That night, Elena lay beside Julian in the small twin bed of their temporary apartment. His little hand rested over her wrist, his thumb twitching slightly in his sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. She whispered a line from a Spanish proverb her grandmother used to say. Un solo hilo de seda sostiene más peso que una cadena, si se ata en el momento adecuado. A single thread of silk holds more weight than a chain if tied at the right moment. Elena turned her head and looked at the card resting on her nightstand. Paris, next Thursday. She didn't know how to dress for a meeting like that. Didn't know what would be expected of her. Didn't know if she was making the right choice or the biggest mistake of her life. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She knew what it meant when someone powerful chose not to demand proof of worth a second time. When someone saw value in you that the world had overlooked. When someone offered not just a seat at the table, but a place to finally, truly belong. Elena closed her eyes. Julian's breathing was steady and warm beside her. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise, and for the first time in years, Elena didn't feel like someone running from something. She felt like someone walking toward it. She felt like someone who had finally arrived. You know, sometimes we spend our whole lives waiting for someone to see us. Really see us. Not just what we look like or where we come from or what mistakes we've made, but who we actually are, what we're capable of. Elena had been invisible for so long, a single mother, a college dropout, someone the world had decided didn't matter. But James didn't see any of that. He heard a voice singing in 7 languages. He saw a mind that caught errors in seconds. He recognized something the world had missed. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's all it takes. One person who listens, one moment of recognition, one chance to prove that you were never invisible at all. You were just waiting for someone to look. If this story touched your heart, remember that everyone around you has gifts the world hasn't noticed yet. Sometimes all they need is someone willing to listen, someone willing to see, someone willing to offer a seat at the table. Thank you for listening to this story. May you find your voice, and may someone recognize its worth.